Hi there and welcome back. We're going to continue with the muscular system lecture, part 1. So I'm going to be talking with you about the muscular system. And so let us get started here. I need to just grab my pointer. Okay, and then we will be ready to rock and roll. We're going to put our friend away for a minute. We will be using our friend maybe a little later on to point out some of the muscle groups and stuff to you. So I want to go over the primary objectives for the muscular system. We want to be able to describe the structure and function of skeletal muscle tissue and indicate where it's found in the body, and to define the muscular system. We're also going to talk about the role of the following membranes around muscular bundles of tissue. We're going to name and locate major muscles of the human body. We're going to be using study guide 4 on the muscular system, so do please get that out. We're going to be working on filling that in. And we want to understand the relationship between the nervous system and skeletal muscle at the neuromuscular junction. So we're going to be talking about the neuromuscular junction a bit. And we're going to talk about the gross and microscopic anatomy of muscle tissue. We're also going to talk quite a bit about the physiology of muscle contraction. So there are certain terms that we're going to be taking a look at. Certain vocabulary that we're going to be talking about, like the sarcomere, the sarcolemma, and so on. There's a point where we're going to be talking about a variety of different types of proteins, like actin and myosin, and the troponin complex and tropomyosin, and how they interact in the sliding filament of muscle contraction. So you might want to also have the sliding filament of muscle contraction worksheet out that I gave you. We're going to be filling in the steps of that during the muscular system lecture. I'm definitely going to need more than 15 minutes though to talk about the muscular system, so that will probably be it'll probably be part of one of the other segments. We're also going to describe how an action potential is initiated in a muscle cell and the events of the muscle cell contraction. We're going to talk about what a graded response is, and then, like I said, talk a little bit about how the nervous system is involved in the skeletal muscle contraction process at the neuromuscular junction. So there are 3 kinds of muscle tissue, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because this is kind of a review. But remember, we have 3 types of muscle tissue: your skeletal muscle tissue, your cardiac muscle tissue, and then your smooth muscle tissue. So there's certain features that we want to learn for the skeletal muscle tissue. And one of the primary features of skeletal muscle tissue is that you have long cylindrical shaped cells, and they have these very prominent stripes, the striated appearance. And we're going to be talking quite a bit today about that striated appearance, why that occurs. It all has to do with the sliding filament model of muscle contraction. So there's 3 primary terms that would be good to learn for skeletal muscle cell characteristics, and those are that they are voluntary muscles, they are skeletal, and that they have striations. Some of the other characteristics of skeletal muscle tissue are the cells have many nuclei in them, they're long cylindrical cells, they have lots of mitochondria for muscle cell contraction. We'll talk a little bit more about that further on in the lecture. So the other type, or one of the other types of muscle tissue, is cardiac muscle tissue. And cardiac muscle tissue is specifically found in the heart. And it does have striations, so you can see that striped appearance, but it also has one nucleus per cell, so uninucleate, single nucleate per cell, and then it has these junctions between cells called intercalated discs. And we'll talk about those a little bit more when we talk about the cardiovascular system. But three good terms to know for the cardiac muscle cell characteristics are cardiac and striated, and then involuntary. And then we have our smooth muscle tissue sample here. And our smooth muscle cells are also long, kind of narrow cells, but they come to a point at either end, so they have that spindle shape. We also don't see striations in smooth muscle, whereas we see striations in the other two types, skeletal muscle and cardiac muscle. The other thing is they have one nucleus per cell, so single nucleate. But three good terms to know for smooth muscle tissue are non-striated, involuntary, because smooth muscle is involuntary along with cardiac muscle, but also visceral. Visceral because smooth muscle makes up blood vessels and our internal organs, like in our digestive system, the uterus for the ladies. So visceral means viscera or organ. So it makes up many internal organs. Okay, to be able to talk about the muscles, we want to cover some of the terminology that we're going to be using here. And one really important aspect of talking about the muscular system is the fact that that muscle fibers are really the equivalent of muscle cells. So knowing kind of the level that you're at this point in the class is going to be important, because there are going to be times when we are going to be looking at kind of the outside of the cell, looking in and more than one cell as we study the structure of muscles. And there's going to be other times when we're actually looking on the inside of the cell, what's going on with these proteins in the sliding filament model of muscle contraction that are going to be interacting. And these different types of proteins are your actin, your myosin, and then there's going to be a couple other ones that I'm going to talk about, your troponin complex and your tropomyosin. So it's important that we understand kind of the level and where we are in terms of, are we looking at a whole cell, or are we looking at proteins inside the cell? So myofilaments are these structures that are referring to the proteins, basically, within the primary contractile unit of the skeletal muscle cells, which is called the sarcomere. So we'll talk about that a little bit more in a bit here. So some other words that really pertain to the muscular system are your terms myo or mice. Whenever you see those prefixes, that refers to the muscular system. And then there are terms like sarco, which means flesh. So there are certain parts of the cell, of the skeletal muscle cells that we are going to be talking about, that are where you're going to see these terms used, and you can just automatically know that, oh, okay, well, that's pertaining to the muscular system. Like the fact that sarcolemma is what we call the plasma membrane around the muscle cell, that the sarcoplasm is the cytoplasm of the muscle cell. And then we're going to be talking about your sarcoplasmic reticulum, which is the endoplasmic reticulum within a muscle cell, specialized endoplasmic reticulum that's going to have a certain job. So this is where the material on the cell biology, that cell biology review that we did, that was important material to kind of review those structures of the cell, the organelles within the generalized cell, because now we're going to be talking about specific structures within the muscle cell and the specific jobs that they do for this kind of cell, for the muscle cell. So general functions and kind of characteristics of the muscle tissue are listed here on this slide. So we want to talk about these general characteristics for a little bit. So with muscle cells, they are excitable or have irritability. What that means is they're a very specialized cell that is able to respond to a neuron sending an action potential down that neuron, so they can respond to the stimulus and react. And then contractility, they have the ability to shorten, to contract when they're stimulated by the neuron. They also have extensibility. That means they have the ability to be stretched to a certain extent beyond their point of going back to kind of normal. So they can be stretched for a bit, but the cells are relatively delicate, and of course at a certain point they'll tear if they're stretched too much. And then the elasticity, the ability for that cell to be able to recoil back into its original shape and position. One really good rule to follow when you're studying particularly skeletal muscle cell contraction, and today we're going to be talking most about skeletal muscle cell contraction when we cover the sliding filament model of muscle contraction. But one thing about skeletal muscles is that they always pull, they don't push to do their job. So skeletal muscle cells action is always a pulling action. In other words, the cells themselves, the bundles, they're actually contracting, they're shortening in order to do their job. So it's a pulley system. They're not typically pushing to do their job. Because they're contracting and pulling, they're also doing things like stabilizing our joints all around our body. Just the fact that I can sit here in this chair has to do with the fact that my skeletal muscles are contracting around my joints against gravity to even just stabilize my body position. So functions of the muscular system are that you have, of course, locomotion, your movement. So the whole fact that I can move my whole body because of my skeletal muscle cells contracting. The fact that I can move substances within my body because of smooth muscle tissue within my alimentary canal, my digestive system contracting. For instance, food emptying from my stomach into my intestines. There's smooth muscle layers all along my digestive system that are helping to propel materials through those body tubes. And then stabilization of body position, the fact that I have skeletal muscles contracting all around my joints is the reason I can sit here in this chair and just talk to begin with. And then regulation of organ volume, like sphincters. There are many smooth muscle sphincters, like the pyloric sphincter that is connecting between my stomach and my small intestines, emptying my stomach into my small intestines and moving that material through. And then thermogenesis, the fact that in this cold room, in this lab, I can move around and I can generate heat through the metabolic activity of my skeletal muscles. So those are the functions of the muscular system. All right, the skeletal muscles and muscle cells and muscle tissue are organized in a certain way with kind of smaller and smaller repeating bundles. So all skeletal muscles are organized in this way, and those muscle cells, of course, are going to contract, they're going to shorten and able to do their job. And we have connective tissue membranes that kind of wrap around those bundles of muscle cells.